They brought more pleasure to concubines than sultans, the first bridal night with eunuchs. Welcome! Today, we will talk about the life of eunuchs in the harem of the Ottoman Empire. And we will also delve into how these men secluded themselves with the Sultan's concubines when no one was watching. You will learn why eunuchs were castrated from a young age and what partial castration entailed, how the first bridal night of a eunuch with a concubine unfolded, and what fingers and tongue had to do with it. Is it true that castrated men easily accepted concubines with children into their new family? Be sure to watch the video to the very end so as not to miss anything important. Eunuchs. Who are they? As is customary, let's first understand who a eunuch is and what role he played in the harem of an Eastern sultan. Surely you have noticed that concubines in the Ottoman Empire were constantly surrounded by attendants. This is vividly illustrated in historical literature books. Many viewers also notice this key detail when watching relevant films and programs. So, these men are the eunuchs. Their distinctive feature is that they cannot father a child. From an early age, boys are castrated, removing their reproductive organs. They are then placed in the harems of the Sultan, where they oversee the concubines. Eunuchs served not only in the Ottoman Empire, but also in other countries worldwide, for example, in the harem of the Chinese emperor. It is important to understand that men were castrated for one sole purpose: to prevent concubines from straying and getting pregnant. In the harems of Eastern sultans, there were so many women and girls that it was impossible to keep track of each one. Naturally, the female members desired affection, care, and perhaps more. That is why the Sultan hired individuals who could monitor the situation, ensuring no physical satisfaction. Eunuchs were the only ones capable of this. Everything would have been fine, but there is one catch. Castration at that time came in two forms: complete and partial. With the former, the entire reproductive system was removed. However, with partial castration, only the testicles were removed while leaving the sexual organ intact. The similarity between the two methods lies in the fact that any eunuch could not sire offspring. The difference is clear. With partial castration, a man could still provide some pleasure to a woman. Both partners took advantage of this aspect, great privileges. Eunuchs played a pivotal role in many states due to their significant privileges. They not only guarded the Sultan's harem, but also participated in making decisions of state importance. Because boys were deprived of their reproductive organs before reaching maturity, their voices changed. This in turn influenced their oratory skills and ability to sing beautifully. Some eunuchs, due to their high status, served as advisors to rulers. This is why parents often considered their children as potential eunuchs. They were well aware that they could rise through the ranks and become successful individuals. Of course, there were also those who chose to become eunuchs of their own accord, but this was more of an exception than the rule. However, the main privilege for the attendants of the Sultan and rulers in other countries was their connection to the concubines. It was the eunuchs who were constantly surrounded by these beautiful women. Initially, the men only watched over the concubines. It was only later that they would take the significant and risky step, entrusted only to them. It may seem strange, but the concubines preferred the eunuchs over the Sultan. Where is the logic and rational explanation here? It turns out it's much simpler. Firstly, as you already know, the Sultan couldn't devote enough attention to each female member. This meant that the women sought ways to find a man outside of his attention. And here, the eunuch came into play, constantly present and trustworthy. Secondly, eunuchs in the harem became full-fledged psychologists who knew all the concubine's needs. They could easily win a woman over, and she had only to trust and express herself freely. In contrast, such psychological tricks did not work with the Sultan. In addition to everything, eunuchs were characterized by peculiar physical features. These men were tall, with robust builds, and in most cases, devoid of facial hair. By the way, eunuchs were specifically recruited to protect the imperial court of Chinese rulers. They could outmatch almost any opponent and safeguard everything essential. The only drawback the attendants possessed was related to the disproportionate ratio of their upper and lower limbs. Nevertheless, concubines grew accustomed to eunuchs over long months, even years. Therefore, all shortcomings were pushed to the background. It should be noted that the majority of eunuchs in the Ottoman Empire were black men. Hence, the specific nickname Black Scots was bestowed upon them. As an indispensable attribute, they carried a whip. The average lifespan of eunuchs during those times was 44 years. So, how did the first bridal night of a eunuch with a concubine unfold? Of course, the bridal night is a conditional concept since, as you remember, conceiving a child was unrealistic. For this reason, the partners secluded themselves together in a way that the Sultan wouldn't notice. Otherwise, the consequences for the eunuch would not be favorable. He could lose not only his job, but also his life, in extremely severe cases. After their seclusion, the eunuch would display all his skill. He provided such pleasure that the concubine would completely surrender herself to him and no one else. Yes, without reproductive organs in full castration, delivering pleasure to a partner was unattainable, but fingers and tongue were still at play. You will be surprised to know that eunuchs often witnessed concubines engaging in extramarital affairs. Naturally, a logical question arises. Why did the attendants allow this? The answer is quite simple. It turns out that this was how eunuchs found true enjoyment. And for this purpose, men deliberately sought companions. As many of you may have guessed, eunuchs could indeed intertwine their future lives with concubines. However, for this to happen, they had to declare their departure from the harem of the Eastern Sultan. Then, events would unfold in a completely different scenario. Let's discuss this at the end. What became of eunuchs after service? Over the years of their service in the Sultan's harem, eunuchs earned quite substantial sums. To put it into perspective, after leaving their jobs, they practically indulged in anything they desired. Each one managed to secure the financial well-being of their future families. Of course, many eunuchs used their accumulated wealth to establish their own harems. They no longer depended on higher positions, such as the Sultan. However, former servants mostly integrated into new families. And yes, eunuchs readily accepted girls and women who already had children without any queries. This allowed the men to adopt future heirs and raise them as their own. Therefore, the primary physiological drawback held no significance.